History often shouts about emperors and battles, but it whispers the most compelling tales. The real story of ancient China lives in the quiet rhythms of its daily life. This was a civilization built not just on grand philosophies, but on the calloused hands of farmers and the meticulous work of artisans. By the end of this journey, you will understand how the everyday routines of millions created a culture that endured for millennia. We will uncover how a peasant's connection to the land mirrored the emperor's connection to heaven, and what a single silk robe could reveal about an entire social order. What does a forgotten world tell you about our own? The true pulse of ancient China did not beat within palace walls, but in the flooded fields that stretched to the horizon. Here, the farmer's life was a cycle of unending labor dictated by the sun and the seasons. For the vast majority of people, existence was defined by the cultivation of rice, a process far more demanding than we might assume today. It began with preparing the muddy paddies, a back-breaking task of digging and leveling the earth by hand. Next came the delicate work of transplanting young rice shoots one by one into the knee-deep water. This required a bent back for hours under a blazing sun, with every movement a careful negotiation with the mud and the fragile plants. Harvest time brought its own intensity as entire families worked to cut the stalks with sickles, thresh the grains, and dry them for storage. This was not merely a job, it was a relentless physical ritual that shaped the very bones of a civilization. To sustain this agricultural empire, ancient Chinese engineers performed miracles of hydraulic ingenuity. One of the most remarkable was the Duzhongyan irrigation system, a project that tamed a furious river without building a single dam. Instead of blocking the water, the system cleverly split it, channeling a portion to irrigate the Chengdu plains while the main flow continued its course. This was a masterpiece of working with nature, not against it, a network of canals and channels meticulously maintained by local farmers carried life-giving water to fields for miles around. This was not just infrastructure, it was a covenant between the people and the land, ensuring that the river's power was harnessed for creation, not destruction. Can you envision the collective effort, the generations of knowledge required to keep such a system functioning for centuries? This entire world of the farmer was governed by a celestial clock, the lunar calendar. It was more than just a way to mark days, it was a sacred almanac for survival. It told farmers precisely when to plant the millet, when to flood the fields for the rice, and when to harvest before the autumn rains. This calendar connected their daily toil directly to the movements of the moon and stars, reinforcing a profound belief in a cosmic order. The Emperor, the Son of Heaven, was the linchpin of this order. His virtue and rituals were believed to ensure harmony between heaven and earth, which in turn guaranteed good harvests. A peasant sowing a single seed was, in a very real sense, participating in the same cosmic balance that the emperor was tasked with upholding from his throne. The entire economic and social structure of the empire rested on this foundation, on the calloused hands that fed everyone from the scholar to the soldier. But what happened when you left the fields and entered the bustling world of the city? But beyond the fields lay a world of organized chaos, a universe contained within towering walls. Stepping into the capital city of Chang'an during the Tang dynasty was to enter one of the largest and most meticulously planned cities on Earth. Its layout was a perfect grid, a physical manifestation of the cosmic order the emperor upheld. Wide, arrow-straight avenues, some over 150 meters across, divided the city into over 110 walled wards. Each ward was a miniature city in itself, locked shut at night by its own gates, creating a fortress within a fortress after dark. The noise was a constant symphony of urban life. The clatter of horse hooves and wooden cart wheels on stone paving mixed with the shouts of merchants and the chatter of 1,000 different languages from every corner of the Silk Road. The air was thick with the scent of sizzling street food, exotic spices, dust, and the distinct smell of incense wafting from temples. This was a global crossroads where Persian traders, Turkish horsemen, and Japanese scholars all navigated the same grand thoroughfares. The city's heart beat in its two enormous regulated marketplaces, the East and West markets. Here, the empire's incredible productivity was on full display. In one stall, you could find delicate celadon pottery, while the next offered bolts of silk so fine they felt like air. You could hear the clink of coins as deals were struck for jade, lacquerware, or tea. Yet this vibrant commercial energy existed in stark contrast to the city's other half. To the north, behind even more formidable walls, lay the imperial city and the palace itself, a realm of silent courtyards, imposing administration halls, and bureaucrats in elegant robes. Here, the business of empire was conducted with quiet formality, a world away from the shouting market vendors. This was the dual nature of ancient urban life, a constant dance between the rigid, controlled order of the state and the pulsing, unpredictable energy of human commerce. How did this complex society decide who mattered and who simply did the work? Within the city walls and across the countryside, the most powerful force in an individual's life was not the emperor or the market, but the family. The household was far more than a place to live. It was a sacred institution built on the rigid framework of Confucian philosophy. At its heart was the concept of filial piety, the unwavering devotion and obedience a child owed their parents. This was not merely a suggestion, it was the bedrock of all social order. A son's primary duty was to honor his father in all things, from his career choices to the woman he married. A daughter was raised with one paramount goal: to one day serve her parents-in-law with the same absolute loyalty. The patriarch's authority was absolute, his word the final law within the home's walls. This domestic hierarchy mirrored the state's own structure, where subjects obeyed the emperor just as children obeyed their father. Can you feel the weight of that expectation, the way it shaped every decision from birth? The complexity of these households could be immense, especially among the wealthy. A successful man might have multiple wives and concubines, all living under one roof. This created a delicate and often tense ecosystem where women competed for status and resources, each seeking favor for themselves and their children. The principal wife held a position of honor, but a beloved concubine could wield immense influence behind the scenes. For the children born into these arrangements, their entire social standing and inheritance rights were determined by their mother's rank. This was a world of quiet alliances and subtle rivalries, all contained within the family compound. The home was a training ground for citizenship. By learning to navigate this mini-empire with its clear roles and strict chains of command, a person was prepared to take their place in the wider world. A son who mastered respect for his father would naturally become a loyal official. A daughter trained in servitude would become a wife who upheld her husband's household. In this way, the stability of millions of individual families directly reinforced the stability of the entire empire. It makes you wonder what kind of private thoughts and secret rebellions were hidden behind those obedient faces. How did a person's inner world truly function within such a carefully ordered existence? This rigid family structure was the foundation for a society even more stratified, a world defined by a clear and unyielding hierarchy. Your place in the world was announced before you even spoke by the very clothes on your back. Sumptuary laws dictated every aspect of life, from the length of your sleeves to the materials used to build your home. An emperor wore brilliant yellow silk embroidered with dragons, a color and symbol forbidden to all others. A scholar official might wear deep blue or purple silks, while a merchant, no matter how wealthy, was legally restricted to plain, unadorned fabrics. The common farmer wore clothing of rough hemp, a practical and durable material that spoke volumes about his station. Your house, your carriage, even the number of servants you could employ were all prescribed by your rank. This was a visual language everyone understood, a constant reminder of the social order. This system was formerly known as the Four Occupations, a philosophical framework that categorized all of society into four distinct classes. At the very top were the scholar officials, the Shi. They were the administrators, the thinkers, the men who passed the notoriously difficult civil service examinations to govern the empire. Their authority came not from wealth or birth, but from their perceived mastery of Confucian classics and moral virtue. Below them were the Nong, the farmers. They were revered in theory for feeding the nation and seen as the economic backbone of the state, even as they lived in near constant toil. Next came the Gong, the artisans and craftspeople. These were the skilled hands that produced the goods everyone needed, from pottery and tools to the magnificent silks that defined the upper classes. And at the very bottom of this hierarchy were the Shang, the merchants. They were viewed with deep suspicion by the ruling elite. Why? Because they produced nothing tangible. They merely moved goods from one place to another, profiting from the labor of others. This made them potentially disruptive, a wild card in a system built on stability and fixed roles. For the vast majority of people, moving between these classes was nearly impossible. A farmer's son was expected to be a farmer. An artisan's daughter would almost certainly marry another artisan. The only real, though incredibly narrow, path to upward mobility was through education. If a family could somehow scrape together the resources to spare a son from labor and pay for a tutor, that boy just might pass the imperial examinations. Success meant a position in the vast bureaucracy, bringing honor and privilege to the entire family line. But this was a lottery with astronomical odds, a dream that sustained millions even as it remained out of reach for almost all. Can you hear the quiet rustle of silk and the coarse scrape of hemp, a sound that told you everything you needed to know about a person's world? The rustle of a scholar's silk robe was a sound earned through one of the most grueling intellectual journeys in human history. For a young boy from even a modest family, the path to becoming a government official began almost as soon as he could speak. His entire childhood and adolescence were dedicated to a single, monumental task, memorizing the Confucian classics. These ancient texts, filled with philosophical dialogues and historical lessons, were not just books to be read. They were sacred scripts to be absorbed into the very fiber of his being. He would spend years reciting and copying characters, learning to write essays and poetry in a precise, elegant style. Every word, every historical reference had to be perfectly recalled, for his future hinged on the ability to reproduce this wisdom on command. This was an education of relentless repetition, a mental discipline that forged a shared cultural identity across the empire. The ultimate test of this learning was the imperial examination, a multi-tiered ordeal that could make or break a family's fortunes. The highest-level exams were held in the capital city and were as much a test of endurance as of intellect. Candidates were sealed for 3 days and 2 nights in tiny, Spartan examination cells, little more than bare cubicles with a board for a desk and a shelf for sleeping. They brought their own food, water, and writing materials into this isolated space. Once the heavy gate clanged shut, there was no communication with the outside world. Inside that cramped cell, a man would face the questions that determined his destiny. He had to compose elegant poetry, analyze complex philosophical problems, and propose solutions to hypothetical matters of state, all based on his mastery of the classics. The pressure was unimaginable. Failure meant years of his life, and his family's investment had been wasted. Success, however, was a transformation that echoed for generations. Passing the exam did not just grant a job, it conferred the highest social status. A successful candidate became part of the esteemed scholar official class, the Shi. He gained the privilege of wearing those distinctive robes, of bowing in the emperor's presence, and of administering the laws of the land. His entire family, even his remote ancestors, were elevated in prestige. This system, for all its brutality, created a remarkable ideal, a meritocracy where theoretically the most capable minds governed the empire, yet the reality was often different. The years of tutelage required immense financial resources, putting the dream out of reach for the vast majority of peasant families. Still, the mere possibility of such a rise fueled ambition and reinforced the state's authority. How did these powerful men, shaped by texts and tradition, interact with the artists who gave their world such breathtaking beauty? While a scholar's success was measured by his public writings, a woman's worth was often judged by the silence of her footsteps. For the elite classes, this silence was enforced in the most visceral way imaginable through the practice of foot binding. Beginning in childhood, a girl's feet were systematically broken and tightly bound to prevent normal growth, creating the so-called golden lotus, a deformed foot only 3 or 4 inches long. This excruciating process, which made walking a delicate, painful shuffle, was not seen as mutilation but as the pinnacle of refinement and beauty. It was a clear signal that a woman's family was so wealthy she would never need to labor in the fields, that her only purpose was to be an ornament, a symbol of her husband's status. The smaller her feet, the more desirable she became as a bride. This custom, so brutal in its execution, reveals a painful truth about the era. A woman's body could become a canvas upon which society painted its ideals of class and femininity. Yet within the confines of the inner quarters, women exercised a form of power that was rarely acknowledged in official records. The management of a large household was a monumental task, a complex business involving budgets, servants, supplies, and the education of young children. A skilled matriarch was the chief executive of a domestic empire, her efficiency directly impacting the family's fortune and social standing. Her influence, though exercised behind screens and closed doors, was often the invisible hand guiding the family's destiny. And sometimes that influence reached far beyond the home. In the rarefied air of the imperial court, a handful of women defied all constraints to wield power on a staggering scale. Empress Wu Zetian of the Tang dynasty did not merely influence from behind the throne, she seized it, becoming the only woman in Chinese history to rule as emperor in her own right. Other dowager empresses like Cixi of the late Qing dynasty became the de facto rulers for decades, commanding armies and directing state policy through their young sons, the puppet emperors. These women were the spectacular exceptions that proved the rule, demonstrating a fierce intelligence and political savvy that the system could not completely contain. A different kind of rebellion flourished in the world of arts and letters. A small number of women, often from scholarly families, received an education and used it to express a uniquely female perspective. The poet Li Qingzhao of the Song dynasty composed verses of such profound beauty and sorrow that they are still revered today. Her early works spoke of love and wine, but her later poems, written after her husband's death and the invasion of her homeland, ache with a grief that transcends centuries. Through her brush and ink, she carved out a space for a woman's voice in a world dominated by men. These educated women, along with the household managers and the political players, created a complex tapestry of female experience. It was a life of severe restrictions, but also of quiet resilience and unexpected agency. Their stories whisper a question: how do you measure a life lived largely in the shadows, when its impact echoes through the halls of power and the lines of immortal poetry? The delicate verses of a female poet and the weighty edicts of an emperor both depended on the hands of a different class of individual entirely. The world of the artisan was one of fire, clay, and relentless patience. Inside a workshop thick with the smell of wood smoke and wet earth, a master craftsman and his apprentices were not just making objects, they were breathing life into materials. Their creations defined Chinese civilization, from the sacred bronze vessels used in ancestral rites to the humble porcelain bowl that held a farmer's rice. The process of casting bronze was a form of alchemy. Intricate models were carved from clay and baked into molds, then molten bronze, a glowing river of liquid metal, was poured into the narrow space between them. Once cooled and broken free, the result was a vessel like a ding, a three-legged cauldron used for ritual offerings. Its surface might be adorned with touty masks, stylized animal faces that stared out with a mysterious power, meant to connect the earthly world with the spiritual one. This was not mere decoration, it was a language of symbols cast in metal. Working with jade required a different kind of magic, one of subtraction. Jade is an impossibly tough stone, so it could not be carved with a metal tool. Instead, artisans used abrasives, patiently grinding the raw block with sand and water over months or even years to reveal the form hidden within. A jade bai, a flat disc with a hole in its center, symbolized heaven and was a grave good for the highest nobility. The labor invested in its creation was a measure of its spiritual worth, a physical testament to the belief that virtue, like jade, was refined through perseverance. The mastery of these crafts was passed down through a rigid apprenticeship system. A young boy, perhaps from an artisan family, would be sent to a master's workshop. His first years were spent on the most mundane tasks, sweeping the floor, preparing clay, and watching. Only after proving his dedication and respect would he be allowed to touch a tool. He learned not from written manuals, but by watching the master's hands, by mimicking the exact pressure needed to shape a pot or apply a layer of lacquer. This system preserved techniques for generations, creating an unbroken chain of knowledge from father to son, from master to apprentice. In the cities, artisans often organized into guilds. These associations set standards for quality, controlled prices, and provided a collective voice in a society that officially placed them above only the merchants. A porcelain kiln was a world of its own, a dragon of fire that had to be fed and controlled with absolute precision. The development of true porcelain in China was a technological leap that would not be replicated elsewhere for over 1,000 years. It required a specific type of clay, kaolin, and firing temperatures so high they transformed the material into something entirely new, a substance that was white, hard, and vitrified. The famous celadon wares, with their serene green glaze resembling jade, were achieved through a secret recipe and a precisely controlled atmosphere inside the kiln. 1 degree too hot or too cold, and an entire week's work could emerge as a pile of cracked, discolored failures. The finest pieces, those with flawless glazes and perfect form, were destined for one place only, the imperial court. A single imperial order could keep a workshop busy for a year, producing exquisite vessels for palace banquets or ritual objects for the emperor's ceremonies. But the artisan's work also flowed into the streets in the form of robust stoneware jars for storing grain, or beautifully carved lacquer boxes that held a scholar's writing brushes. The artisan's workshop was a crucible where raw earth was transformed into objects of both profound utility and breathtaking beauty. Their silent skill built the visual and tactile world of an empire, one perfect bowl, one intricate carving at a time. The silent skill of the artisan gave form to the bowls and cups, but it was the contents of those vessels that truly sustained the empire. On the table of a common family, the meal was a study in simplicity and survival. The foundation was always grain, a constant companion from the northern plains of millet to the southern paddies of rice. These were not side dishes, they were the meal itself, the very definition of food. A humble bowl of rice steamed to perfection, or a thick porridge of millet known as congee, formed the core of every dinner. This was accompanied by small portions of pickled vegetables, perhaps some dried fish, or the most revolutionary of all ingredients, the soybean. This unassuming legume was a nutritional cornerstone, transformed by ingenuity into a universe of flavors. It was pressed into creamy tofu, a versatile protein that absorbed the taste of any broth. It was fermented into rich, dark soy sauce that seasoned every stir-fry and dipping sauce. It was even cultured into funky pastes and solid blocks, providing the salty, savory depth known as umami long before the word existed. For the vast majority, meat was a rare luxury, a special treat for a festival or a celebration, making these plant-based staples the true fuel of a civilization. The methods used to prepare this food were as practical as they were ingenious. In a home with limited fuel, efficiency was paramount. The wok, with its curved bottom, became the essential tool. It conducted heat quickly and evenly, allowing a cook to stir-fry vegetables in minutes over a small, fierce fire, preserving both texture and nutrients. Steaming was another common technique, using cleverly stacked bamboo baskets over a single pot of boiling water to cook rice and fish simultaneously. For the poor, a simple clay pot simmering over coals could turn a handful of grain and some wild greens into a nourishing, if monotonous, meal. The contrast with the world of the elite could not have been more stark. An imperial banquet was a performance of power and abundance, a symphony of excess. A single feast could feature dozens of courses, from delicate dumplings shaped like rabbits to whole roasted suckling pigs with glazed, crackling skin. Exotic delicacies like bear paw, shark fin, and bird's nest soup were displayed as proof of the emperor's far-reaching influence. Elaborate soups, sweet pastries, and platters of meticulously carved fruits were arranged not just for taste but for visual spectacle. Each dish was a work of art, a message about the boundless wealth and refinement of the host. Amidst the simplicity of the common meal and the extravagance of the feast, one beverage united all levels of society: tea. Its journey from a medicinal herb to a cultural pillar is a story in itself. Initially valued by monks and scholars for its ability to aid meditation and focus, the ritual of tea drinking slowly permeated every layer of Chinese life. For the farmer, it was a revitalizing break from back-breaking labor, a warm, bitter brew gulped from a simple bowl. For the scholar, it became the center of an elaborate ceremony, a practice of mindfulness and aesthetic appreciation. The preparation required specific water, heated to the perfect temperature and poured into delicate cups to unlock the tea's subtle aroma and flavor. This was the Cha Dao, the way of tea, a philosophy that found harmony and tranquility in a single cup. Can you sense the quiet in a scholar's studio, the only sound the gentle pour of hot water, a world away from the clamor of the street vendor selling the same leaves to the masses? Yet this entire culinary world, from the emperor's banquet hall to the peasant's single pot, existed under a long and frightening shadow, the ever-present threat of famine. A single season of drought, a week of locusts, or a river flooding at the wrong time could wipe out the year's harvest. When the grain stores emptied, desperation set in. People turned to bark, roots, and even poisonous plants they knew might kill them, a terrible gamble between a slow death and a fast one. The specter of starvation was the dark counterpoint to the agricultural miracle, a reminder of how fragile the social contract truly was. In these times, the emperor's mandate from heaven was tested most severely, for a ruler who could not feed his people was seen as having lost the favor of the gods. The memory of hunger was woven into the fabric of daily life, a silent, collective fear that gave profound meaning to every simple, sustaining bowl of rice. That ever-present fear of famine was a stark reminder of forces beyond human control, a vulnerability that shaped the spiritual world as much as the physical one. While the emperor performed rituals to maintain cosmic harmony, the common people engaged in a more intimate dialogue with the unseen. Their spiritual life was not a single, rigid doctrine, but a fluid and practical blend of three great traditions: Taoism, Buddhism, and ancient folk religion. This was not a matter of choosing one over the others. A family might consult a Taoist priest for a ritual to bless their home, pray to the Buddha for peace in the afterlife, and leave an offering for the local earth spirit to ensure a good harvest. It was a spiritual ecosystem where different beliefs coexisted and complemented each other, each addressing a different layer of human need. the most immediate and constant spiritual practice was ancestor veneration. This was not merely a matter of respect, it was a vital reciprocal duty. The living and the dead were bound in an unbreakable contract. Families maintained small shrines in their homes with wooden tablets inscribed with the names of their departed ancestors. On important dates, they would present offerings of food, wine, and incense. They believed the spirits of their ancestors continued to exist in a shadowy afterlife and depended on these offerings for their comfort and well-being. In return, the ancestors acted as benevolent protectors, watching over the family and interceding with the higher gods on their behalf. A neglected ancestor, however, could become a hungry ghost, a restless and malevolent spirit that brought misfortune and illness. Can you feel the weight of that responsibility? The knowledge that your actions today could either comfort or condemn a soul for eternity. This practice perfectly mirrored the Confucian family structure, extending filial piety beyond the grave and making the family an eternal institution. Beyond the household shrine lay a world teeming with spirits. Every mountain, river, and ancient tree had its own deity. The stove god watched over the kitchen, and each year his paper image was burned, sending a report on the family's behavior to the Jade Emperor in heaven. People left small offerings for the city god to protect their community from disaster. This animistic worldview saw the entire natural world as alive with consciousness and power. Taoism, with its philosophy of living in harmony with the natural way, the Tao, provided a profound framework for this belief. Taoist masters were sought for their knowledge of alchemy and rituals to balance the energies of the body and the cosmos. They were the experts in dealing with the spirit world, capable of channeling its power for healing and protection. Into this vibrant spiritual landscape came Buddhism, arriving from India along the Silk Road. It introduced a radically different concept, the cycle of reincarnation and the possibility of escaping suffering entirely by achieving enlightenment or nirvana. While the goal of nirvana was for monks and spiritual adepts, for the average person, Buddhism offered a compassionate savior in the Bodhisattva Guanyin, the goddess of mercy who heard the cries of the world. It also provided elaborate and comforting rituals for the dead, helping souls navigate the complex bureaucracy of the underworld before their next rebirth. A single funeral might include chanting Buddhist sutras to guide the soul, performing Taoist rites to purify the path, and conducting Confucian ceremonies to honor the family lineage. This was the syncretic genius of ancient Chinese spirituality, a flexible and deeply personal tapestry of belief that addressed every fear and every hope, from the harvest in the field to the fate of the soul in the world to come. The emperor's palace was a city within a city, a universe governed by its own sacred geometry. Its proper name, the Forbidden City, was no exaggeration. Entry was forbidden to all but a select few, for this was not merely a residence, it was the cosmic engine of the empire. At its center sat the Son of Heaven, a man whose body was considered a vessel for divine will. His every action, from the color of his robes to the rituals he performed at the Hall of Supreme Harmony, was a carefully choreographed performance designed to maintain the balance between heaven and earth. A successful harvest or a season of peace was proof of his virtue. A flood or a famine, however, was a dire warning that the emperor might be losing the mandate of heaven. This was the brilliant and terrifying political philosophy that underpinned every dynasty. The right to rule was granted by heaven, but it was not a permanent gift. It could be withdrawn if a ruler became corrupt, incompetent, or unjust. A peasant rebellion or a military coup was not just a political act, it was interpreted as heaven itself revoking its favor and transferring the mandate to a new, more worthy leader. This belief transformed rebellion from treason into a form of cosmic housekeeping, a necessary reset for a faltering world. Governing an empire of millions from this secluded palace required a machine of staggering complexity, the imperial bureaucracy. This was a vast network of scholar officials, the men who had passed the grueling civil service exams. They were the gears and pulleys that made the empire function, posted to every corner of the land as magistrates, tax collectors, and judges. A county magistrate was the emperor's direct representative to the people, responsible for everything from settling legal disputes and maintaining granaries to organizing local militias. His yamen, or office, was a microcosm of the central government, a place where the abstract laws of the empire met the messy reality of daily life. The sheer volume of paperwork was immense, with every decision, every legal case, and every tax report meticulously documented by scribes and sent in a constant flow to the capital. Can you envision the endless scrolls of reports traveling by horse and canal boat, carrying the weight of the entire realm to the emperor's desk? To prevent this powerful bureaucracy from becoming corrupt or lazy, the emperors employed a remarkable system of oversight, the censorate. These officials were the eyes and ears of the throne. Independent investigators granted the authority to scrutinize anyone, from a low-level tax clerk to the most powerful general. A censor could impeach an official for incompetence, corruption, or even for behavior deemed morally unbecoming. They traveled the empire incognito, listening to the grievances of common people and reporting directly to the emperor. In theory, this created a self-correcting government where integrity was constantly monitored and enforced. Yet the system was far from perfect. A censor's report could be swayed by political rivalries or secret bribes. An honest official might be falsely accused by enemies seeking his post. The constant threat of investigation created an atmosphere of paranoia and caution within the ranks. This immense structure of power, from the secluded son of heaven to the traveling censor, all rested on a single, fragile idea that virtue was the true source of authority. It was a system that could produce golden ages of stability and culture, but one that always carried the seed of its own eventual collapse, waiting for the moment heaven decided the mandate had run its course. Behind the intricate rituals of the court lay a system of law designed to be as unyielding as bronze. The Tang Code was not a set of guidelines but a precise calculus of crime and consequence, a comprehensive legal text that left little to a magistrate's discretion. For every offense, from stealing a chicken to plotting rebellion, it prescribed an exact punishment. The goal was deterrence through fear, and the methods were brutally physical. A thief might have the character for thief tattooed on his face, a permanent and public brand of shame. More severe crimes brought flogging with bamboo canes, a punishment that could cripple or kill depending on the number of strokes ordered. At the far end of this spectrum was execution, often by beheading, a final and terrifying spectacle meant to warn the entire community. Can you hear the stark finality in the clap of the magistrate's wooden gavel, a sound that could set this whole brutal machinery in motion? The man wielding that gavel was the local magistrate, the sole representative of imperial justice for thousands of people. His yamen was a place of immense pressure where he acted as detective, judge, and jury. With no police force as we know it, he relied on his own wits and his small staff of clerks and runners to investigate crimes. The legal process heavily favored confession as the ultimate proof of guilt. To obtain that confession, the law permitted the use of judicial torture. A suspect might be forced to kneel on chains or beaten with rods, the intensity carefully regulated by the code itself. The idea was that an innocent person, fortified by virtue, would endure the pain without confessing, while a guilty conscience would break. It was a terrifying logic that placed the truth in the body's ability to withstand agony. Yet this seemingly rigid system was deeply flexible in one crucial aspect: the status of the accused. The same legal code that mandated 100 blows for a commoner might prescribe only a fine for an official of the 8th rank. A nobleman could often use his privilege to commute a corporal punishment into a monetary payment or a reduction in rank. This was the dark heart of the Confucian order applied to law, where hierarchy was justice. A father held legal authority over his son, a master over his servant, a husband over his wife. Striking a parent was an unforgivable crime that could lead to execution, while a parent who killed a disobedient child might receive a much lighter sentence. The law did not see individuals of equal standing before it, but a web of relationships, each with its own duties and privileges. So, while the Tang Code presented a facade of impartial order, its application was a constant negotiation of power, rank, and influence. A merchant might bribe a clerk to have a case disappear, while a scholar official could call upon his network to protect his family from scandal. Justice was not blind, but keenly aware of the quality of your silk robes and the prestige of your family name. This was the paradox of order in the empire, a system of terrifying punishments that was simultaneously riddled with the very human flaws of bias and corruption. How could such a world, so beautifully ordered in its arts and philosophies, maintain its balance when its foundation was built on such a stark divide between the powerful and the powerless? The rigid hierarchy of the law met its most chaotic and vibrant challenge in the marketplace. Here, in the sprawling east and west markets of Chang'an, the air itself seemed to vibrate with commerce. Long avenues were lined with open stalls, their awnings creating a patchwork of shade and sun, each one a small theater of negotiation. You could find almost anything imaginable. A merchant from Samarkand unrolled carpets woven with patterns unseen in the Middle Kingdom, while a local vendor shouted the price for sturdy iron plows. The scent of drying fish hung next to the intoxicating perfume of sandalwood and cloves, brought by sea and caravan from distant lands. In one corner, the sharp tang of fresh leather rose from a cobbler's stall, and in another, the clink of 1,000 bronze coins accompanied the sale of live chickens and piglets. This was the engine of the ancient economy, a place where the empire's incredible productivity was converted into noise, smell, and movement. The lifeblood of this entire system was bronze coinage. These were not coins as we know them today, but cast bronze discs with a square hole in the center. This practical design allowed merchants to string large sums together on a cord, creating a portable, jingling measure of wealth. A string of 1,000 coins was a standard unit, heavy enough to weigh down a belt but light enough to carry. Every transaction, from buying a single bowl of noodles to purchasing a bolt of the finest silk, was negotiated in these familiar coins. Their value was not in the metal itself, which was often of low quality, but in the imperial stamp that guaranteed their worth. The government mints worked constantly to produce this currency, fueling the economic activity that taxed the empire. Yet carrying vast sums for large business deals was cumbersome and dangerous. This very practical problem led to one of the most revolutionary inventions in economic history: paper money. During the Song dynasty, merchants began depositing their heavy coins with trustworthy shops, receiving paper certificates of deposit in return. These slips of paper could then be traded as currency itself, a promise of payment that was far easier to transport. The government saw the genius in this private system and took control, issuing the world's first state-sanctioned paper money. It was a breathtaking leap of financial technology, born from the daily needs of the marketplace. The state's control over the economy, however, went far beyond printing money. To fund its massive bureaucracy and military, the imperial government established monopolies on essential goods. The two most important were salt and iron. Every person, from the wealthiest official to the poorest farmer, needed salt to preserve food and sustain life. And every farmer and soldier needed iron for their tools and weapons. By controlling the production and sale of these vital commodities, the state guaranteed itself a huge and steady stream of revenue. A merchant wanting to deal in salt had to buy a government license, and smuggling was punished with the utmost severity. This system created a strange paradox. The merchants who operated these state-sanctioned monopolies could become astonishingly wealthy, amassing fortunes that rivaled those of the highest nobles. They lived in sprawling compounds, wore fine silks in private, and patronized the most famous artists and poets. Yet for all their wealth, these merchants occupied the lowest rung in the official Confucian social hierarchy. They were the Shang, viewed with deep suspicion by the scholar officials who governed them. Why was this? In the Confucian worldview, true value came from producing something of moral or tangible worth. The scholar official produced virtuous governance, the farmer produced the food that sustained life, the artisan produced essential goods, but the merchant produced nothing. He merely moved things from one place to another, profiting from the labor and needs of others. This was seen as parasitic, even slightly dishonorable. A merchant's wealth was considered unstable and potentially corrupting, a threat to the stable, agrarian order the state prized above all else. Sumptuary laws constantly reminded them of their place, legally forbidding them from wearing certain colors or using certain building materials, no matter how much money they had. This created a fascinating social tension. A powerful merchant might have the funds to buy every luxury imaginable, but he could never wield the political power or command the respect of a scholar who had passed the examinations. His path to social legitimacy was narrow and expensive. The most common route was to use his wealth to give his sons the education he never had, funding their years of study in the hope that one would pass the exams and elevate the entire family into the respectable scholar official class. In this way, the dynamic energy of commerce was constantly funneled back into reinforcing the very system that looked down upon it. The marketplace, for all its noise and freedom, was ultimately contained within walls built by the state and watched over by a philosophy that never fully trusted the power of the coin. That constant tension between the rigid social order and the chaotic pulse of the marketplace found a perfect parallel in the ancient understanding of the human body. Health was not merely the absence of disease, but a state of perfect internal balance. Traditional Chinese medicine saw the body as a microcosm of the universe itself, governed by the same fundamental forces. The supreme goal was the smooth and abundant flow of Qi, the vital life force that animates all living things. Think of Qi as the very breath of existence, a current of energy that flows through invisible pathways in the body known as meridians. Any blockage or stagnation in this flow was believed to be the root cause of pain and illness. Balancing this system were the two great cosmic opposites, yin and yang. Yin was the cool, dark, passive, and feminine principle, while yang was the warm, bright, active, and masculine principle. In a healthy body, these two forces were in a dynamic and harmonious equilibrium. Too much yang might manifest as a fever, inflammation, or agitation. An excess of yin could lead to chills, fatigue, or depression. A physician's first task was to listen to the body's language and determine where this delicate balance had been lost. This philosophy was further refined through the theory of the 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. Each element corresponded to specific organs, seasons, emotions, and even flavors in the body. The liver was linked to wood and the emotion of anger, while the heart was tied to fire and joy. A skilled healer would see connections a modern doctor might miss, understanding that a chronic lung problem associated with metal could be rooted in an imbalance of the large intestine, also linked to the metal element. This was a holistic view where no organ, emotion, or season existed in isolation. Diagnosis was a subtle art relying on observation and intuition. The physician would carefully examine the patient's tongue, noting its color, coating, and shape, as each area of the tongue mapped to a different internal organ. But the most revered diagnostic technique was pulse reading. This was not simply counting a heartbeat. A practitioner would place 3 fingers on the patient's wrist, each finger sensing a different depth and position corresponding to a specific organ system. They could detect over 28 distinct pulse qualities, from a wiry pulse that felt like a guitar string, indicating stress, to a flooding pulse that felt like a raging river, suggesting excessive heat. This intricate reading provided a detailed map of the body's internal landscape. To restore balance, a physician had a sophisticated toolkit. Acupuncture involved inserting hair-thin metal needles into specific points along the meridians to unblock or redirect the flow of qi. A point on the leg might be used to treat a headache, while a point on the hand could calm an upset stomach. This was not magic, but a precise science of stimulating the body's own healing resources. For conditions related to cold or dampness, a physician might use moxibustion. This involved burning a small, spongy herb called mugwort or moxa, either directly on the skin or just above an acupuncture point. The smoldering moxa produced a profound, penetrating heat that was believed to drive out cold and strengthen the body's yang energy. The most complex and personalized aspect of treatment was herbal medicine. A healer was more like a chef than a pharmacist, creating unique formulas from hundreds of natural ingredients. A typical prescription might include 10 or 20 different herbs, each playing a specific role. Ginseng was the ultimate qi tonic, used to boost energy and vitality. Ginger warmed the stomach and expelled cold. Licorice root harmonized the other ingredients in a formula. These herbs were rarely simply swallowed. Patients would take them home to simmer for hours into a potent, often bitter, tea. The entire process, from the gentle pulse reading to the brewing of the herbal decoction, was a partnership between the healer and the patient, a shared journey back to a state of harmony. How does a civilization's view of the body as a universe in miniature shape its entire approach to life, health, and even the meaning of a good death? Beyond the guarded markets of Chang'an, the real exchange began. The Silk Road was never a single path, but a sprawling web of trails connecting the world. It carried more than just bolts of silk. It was a living artery pulsing with ideas, faiths, and unseen dangers. Imagine the rhythm of a caravan, hundreds of camels laden with goods, their bells creating a lonely music across the deserts of the Taklamakan. This name itself, Taklamakan, translates roughly to place of no return, a stark warning of the journey's perils. Caravans faced shifting dunes that could swallow a man whole, scorching days and freezing nights. Bandits lurked in the mountain passes, waiting to prey on the wealthy trains. Survival depended on the caravansaries, fortified way stations spaced a day's journey apart. Within their thick walls, travelers from across the known world found shelter, water, and a fleeting community. A Persian merchant might share a meal with a Chinese official, their conversation facilitated by a Sogdian translator, the linguistic master of the route. Here, in the firelight of a common hall, philosophies were exchanged as readily as goods. The most profound traveler to make this journey bore no merchandise at all. It was a belief system, Buddhism, which slowly traveled from the monasteries of India into the heart of China. It did not replace the existing traditions of Taoism and ancestor worship, but rather wove itself into them. The serene figure of the Buddha offered a new kind of spiritual solace, a promise of escape from suffering that resonated deeply. Soon, the caves at Dunhuang began to fill with breathtaking murals where Indian deities were painted with Chinese faces and Buddhist parables were told using local landscapes. This was not a simple import, but a true fusion, a new artistic language born from the long, dusty road. The exchange was also deliciously tangible. Foods that would become staples of Chinese cuisine arrived as exotic luxuries. Grapes, pomegranates, walnuts, and sesame all came from the West. These new flavors transformed the culinary landscape, adding sweetness, crunch, and rich oils to the diet. A Chinese nobleman could now sip wine made from Central Asian grapes, while sesame seeds found their way into pastries and sauces. Glass-making techniques from the Roman Empire fascinated Chinese artisans who had previously prized jade and porcelain above all else. Even the chairs we take for today, the very idea of sitting on a raised seat instead of on floor mats, is believed to have entered China from the West via these routes. But the road was a two-way street, and it carried invisible, deadly passengers. The same caravans that brought spices and scriptures also brought plague. When a new disease arrived, it could ravage a population with no immunity, causing social upheaval and devastating loss. The Silk Road was thus the world's first great network of globalization, a beautiful and terrifying force that reshaped daily life in ways both visible and invisible. It reminds us that a road is not just for travel but for transformation. The relentless cycle of farming and commerce found its counterpoint in the brilliant explosions of color and sound that marked the festival year. These were not just holidays, they were the lunar calendar in vibrant motion, moments when the entire society paused to honor its past and reaffirm its deepest values. The year began with its most important celebration, the Lunar New Year. This was a time of profound homecoming when every possible effort was made for families to reunite under one roof. The journey could be long and difficult, but it was a sacred obligation. Homes were meticulously cleaned to sweep away any lingering bad luck, and doorways were decorated with strips of red paper bearing poetic couplets calling for good fortune. The most anticipated moment for children was the giving of red envelopes, little packets of money presented by elders. The color red scared away evil spirits, and the gift symbolized the transfer of blessings and prosperity from one generation to the next. The New Year's feast was a symphony of symbolic foods, each dish carrying a wish for the coming months. Whole fish promised abundance, while dumplings shaped like ancient gold ingots hoped for wealth. The noise of firecrackers was not mere celebration. It was a weapon to frighten away a mythical beast named Nyan, protecting the community for another year. As spring turned to summer, the mood shifted to fierce competition and solemn remembrance during the Dragon Boat Festival. This event commemorated the tragic death of the poet and minister Gyuan, who drowned himself in protest against a corrupt government. The story goes that local villagers raced out in their boats to save him, beating drums and thrashing the water with their paddles to keep fish and evil spirits away from his body. Today, that desperate race is reenacted in the form of dramatic dragon boat competitions. Long, narrow boats, each adorned with a carved dragon's head, slice through the water as teams of rowers paddle in perfect, frantic unison, driven by the relentless beat of a drummer. To prevent Gyuan's spirit from going hungry, people began throwing packets of rice into the river, which evolved into the tradition of eating zongzi. These are sticky rice dumplings stuffed with savory or sweet fillings, all tightly wrapped in bamboo leaves and steamed. The festival was a powerful, physical lesson in loyalty, patriotism, and the collective power of a community to confront despair. The year's cycle reached its most poetic moment under the full moon of autumn. The Mid-Autumn Festival was a night of quiet contemplation and sweet indulgence. The moon, at its largest and brightest, was a universal symbol of completeness and family reunion. For those who could not be with their loved ones, gazing at the same moon was a way to feel connected across the miles. The essential food of this festival was the mooncake, a rich, dense pastry. The outer crust was intricately stamped with symbols of longevity or the characters for harmony, while the inside held a thick, sweet filling, traditionally made from lotus seed paste or red bean, and often surrounding a salted duck egg yolk to represent the full moon itself. Families would gather in courtyards to sip tea, eat these delicacies, and simply appreciate the moon's serene beauty. These festivals, from the explosive New Year to the reflective mid-autumn night, were the living heart of the culture. They wove the threads of family duty, historical memory, and cosmic harmony into the fabric of everyday life, reminding everyone of the bonds that held them together far beyond the walls of their own homes. Your home was the ultimate expression of your place in the world, a physical manifestation of the social hierarchy that governed everything. For the vast majority of peasants, home was a single room of rammed earth, a structure built by hand from the very soil they farmed. The walls were thick blocks of mud and straw compacted between wooden frames, providing a cool respite in summer and a fragile shield against the winter wind. The roof was a steep layer of thatch harvested from the fields, which needed constant repair after heavy rains. Inside, the space was dominated by a kang, a raised earthen platform that served as both bed and living area. Beneath this platform, a small fire channeled heat, warming the family as they slept and gathered. There were no windows, only a single door and perhaps a small hole in the roof to let the smoke from the cooking fire escape. The floor was packed dirt, swept clean each morning. This was a life of profound simplicity, where every object had a purpose and privacy was an unimaginable luxury. Can you feel the closeness of that single room, the way the entire world of a family was contained within those earthen walls? A wealthy merchant or a low-ranking scholar official lived in an entirely different universe, the Sihayuan or courtyard house. This was not a single building, but a small kingdom enclosed by high walls. The layout was a perfect square, with rooms arranged around a central, open-air courtyard. The main gate, often a beautifully carved and painted wooden door, was never aligned directly with the interior, preventing evil spirits, who were believed to travel in straight lines, from entering. Upon stepping inside, a spirit wall, a solid screen of masonry, would block the view, forcing any malevolent energy to turn away. The courtyard itself was the heart of the home, a private oasis where the family could enjoy sunlight, grow potted plants, and gather under the moon. The most important rooms, those for the patriarch and for receiving guests, faced south to capture the most sunlight, a principle of harmony with nature. The architecture was a symphony of wood and tile. Intricately carved beams, painted in deep reds and blues, supported sweeping roofs of gray clay tile. The ends of the roof ridges were often decorated with figures of mythical creatures, each one believed to offer protection from fire and bad luck. The windows were latticed and covered with thin, oiled paper that allowed a soft, diffused light to filter into the rooms. This home was a world of clear separation, where men conducted business in the outer courtyards and women managed the domestic life in the inner quarters, all shielded from the eyes of the outside world. Then there was the palace, a scale of living so immense it was designed to reflect the cosmos itself. The Forbidden City in Beijing is the ultimate example, a complex of nearly 1,000 buildings arranged along a perfect north-south axis. This was not just a home, it was a ritual landscape built according to the ancient principles of Feng Shui, the art of placement. The entire site was chosen and oriented to harness the beneficial flow of Kai, the vital energy of the earth. Mountains to the north provided a protective backing, while a river was channeled to flow through the southern part of the city, ensuring the energy moved in harmony. Every detail, from the number of statues on a rooftop to the height of a staircase, was calculated to maintain the emperor's mandate to rule. The buildings themselves were colossal structures raised on marble platforms, reached by long, flowing ramps carved with dragons. The pillars were made from entire trunks of precious Phoebe-Genin wood, and the roofs were glazed with brilliant yellow tiles, a color reserved for the emperor alone. Inside the halls, the air was cool and smelled of incense and old lacquer. The ceilings were coffered and painted with golden dragons, their eyes following you across the room. The throne sat on a high dais, approached by steps that only the most senior officials were permitted to climb. This was architecture as power, a physical declaration that the man who lived here was the pivot between heaven and earth. From the single-room hut to the sprawling palace, every home told the same story of order, hierarchy, and a deep, enduring connection between the human world and the forces of the universe. The clothes you wore in ancient China spoke before you ever uttered a word. A society built on visible hierarchy expressed its deepest truths through fabric, color, and ornament. For the farmer toiling in the fields, clothing was purely about survival. His wardrobe consisted of rough, unbleached hemp, a durable plant fiber that could withstand the mud, sun, and repetitive labor of rural life. These garments were loose and practical, allowing for a full range of motion as he bent to transplant rice shoots or harvest millet. In the bitter cold of northern winters, he might lay a padded jacket stuffed with cotton, but the fabric remained coarse and undyed, a visual testament to his station. There was no room for adornment, only for utility. Can you feel the scratch of that coarse cloth against the skin? A constant tactile reminder of a life defined by the land. Step into the world of the scholar, official, or the noble, and the language of clothing became infinitely more complex. Here, silk was the ultimate signifier. The production of silk was a state-controlled secret, a long and meticulous process that began with silkworms and mulberry leaves and ended with bolts of fabric so fine they felt like liquid. Wearing silk was a legal privilege, not just a fashion choice. The most striking symbol of this was color, particularly the brilliant yellow reserved exclusively for the emperor. His dragon robes, embroidered with 5 clawed dragons soaring among clouds, were a walking declaration of his celestial mandate. For his court officials, rank was broadcast through the color of their robes. Deep purples, vibrant blues, and rich greens were assigned by grade, a living spectrum of bureaucratic power. A man's position was immediately understood by the hue he wore in the imperial audience hall. This visual coding extended far beyond the robe itself. A scholar would always be seen with his hair meticulously wound into a topknot and covered with a specific style of hat, a gauze cap that denoted his educated status. For an official, his hat was even more significant. It might be a black hat with wing-like flaps, the length and shape of which corresponded to his precise rank within the vast government machinery. Even accessories carried profound meaning. Many elite men and women wore pendants carved from jade, a stone believed to possess vital protective energy. They thought jade could ward off evil spirits and even prevent the body from decaying after death. A jade disc, or a small carving of a mythical beast, was not merely jewelry, it was a portable talisman, a piece of the cosmos worn close to the skin. The complexity of elite dress was a performance in layers. A noblewoman's outfit could involve multiple inner and outer robes, each sleeve layer carefully arranged to create a cascading effect of contrasting colors and textures. Her hair would be an elaborate architecture of braids, loops, and pins made of gold, silver, or kingfisher feathers, a dazzling blue resource so precious it was reserved for the imperial family and the highest nobility. Every element, from the number of pleats in a skirt to the type of knot used to tie a sash, was part of a silent, sophisticated language. This was a world where your identity was literally woven into your attire, a daily performance of your place in a universe of strict order and profound beauty. What did it feel like to move through such a world, your social rank announced with every rustle of silk and every careful step? That silent language of silk and jade found its voice in the vibrant world of leisure. When the day's labor was done, ancient Chinese society revealed a surprising capacity for play, music, and collective wonder. One of the most revered pastimes was the board game known as Go or Waiki. This was far more than a simple game. It was a philosophical battleground played with black and white stones on a grid of 19 by 19 lines. The goal was not to annihilate your opponent, but to strategically surround territory, to control space through patience and foresight. A master player was seen as a sage, his moves on the board reflecting a deep understanding of balance, conflict, and the subtle art of influence. To watch a game of Go was to witness a silent conversation about the very principles that govern the universe. For those seeking faster, louder excitement, there was always gambling. Dice games were a common vice, played in taverns and on street corners with a rattle and a shout. The clatter of dice in a ceramic cup and the groans or cheers of the players were the soundtrack of a more reckless form of fortune. While the scholar elite might frown upon such base pursuits, the thrill of chance captivated people from every walk of life, a reminder that luck could sometimes bypass the rigid social order, if only for a moment. The air in a crowded marketplace or a noble's garden was often filled with music. The gyukin, a 7-stringed zither, was the instrument of the scholar. Its music was not for public performance but for private meditation. A learned man would play for himself or a few close friends, seeking to purify his heart and harmonize his spirit with the natural world. The notes were subtle, often sparse, each one allowed to resonate into silence. In stark contrast was the pipa, a lute-like instrument that arrived via the Silk Road. Held upright and played with vigorous strumming and plucking, the pipa produced a cascading, dramatic sound that could evoke everything from a thunderous cavalry charge to the gentle patter of rain. It was the star of lively ensembles and courtly entertainments, its dynamic voice capable of telling entire stories without a single word. Can you hear the difference between the quiet introspection of the gyukin and the thrilling narrative of the pipa? Public squares came alive with the astonishing feats of acrobats and jugglers. These performers, often from families that had trained for generations, would form human pyramids, balance on precarious stacks of chairs, and juggle an array of objects with impossible dexterity. Their acts were a celebration of the human body's potential, a display of grace and courage that transfixed audiences of all ages. Puppet shows offered another kind of magic, with intricate marionettes acting out scenes from popular legends and Buddhist parables. The puppeteer, hidden from view, gave life to carved wooden figures, his voice shifting from a mighty general to a cunning fox spirit, drawing spectators into a miniature world of drama and morality. But perhaps the most captivating entertainment of all was the storyteller. In the evening, people would gather in a tea house or around a cleared space in the market to listen. The storyteller did not just recite, he performed. He used different voices, dramatic gestures, and the rhythmic clack of a wooden clapper to build suspense. He would recount the epic adventures from the romance of the Three Kingdoms, with its tales of loyalty and betrayal, or the fantastical journey to the West undertaken by the Monkey King. These stories were the history and the dreams of the common people, a shared cultural memory that entertained, educated, and bound the community together under the glow of the lantern light. A single Chinese character holds an entire philosophy within its strokes. This was a writing system that did not merely record speech, it captured ideas in visual form, creating an unbroken thread of culture that could weave together 100 different spoken languages under one written standard. The earliest known examples are the oracle bone inscriptions of the Shang dynasty. These were not grand proclamations, but desperate questions carved into turtle shells and ox scapulae. A king would ask the ancestors, will it rain? Will the harvest be good? Will we win the coming battle? A heated bronze rod was then applied, causing the bone to crack, and the pattern of the cracks was interpreted as the divine answer. These ancient cracks and characters are the birth certificate of Chinese civilization, the moment abstract thought became permanent mark. This powerful tool of unity was forged into an empire-wide standard by the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. He understood that a land divided by 1,000 local scripts could never be truly unified. His legendary chancellor, Lai Si, oversaw the creation of a single, official set of characters, banning the varied forms used by the conquered states. Suddenly, an edict issued from the capital could be read and understood by officials in the farthest provinces. This was a political revolution achieved through the written word, creating an administrative glue that held the empire together for the next 2,000 years. The tools for this sacred act were known as the four treasures of the study. The brush, the ink, the paper, and the inkstone were not mere stationery, they were instruments of cultivation. A scholar would spend a lifetime mastering the grip and pressure needed to guide the soft, tapered hair of the brush, creating characters that were thick and thin, powerful and graceful. He would grind a solid ink stick against the stone with a little water, a slow, meditative process that prepared the mind for the act of writing. The paper itself, another world-changing Chinese invention made from mulberry bark and hemp, was a precious surface that welcomed the ink without bleeding. To write was to perform a ritual, a physical embodiment of the culture's reverence for learning and tradition. Can you feel the quiet concentration in that study, the scent of fresh ink, the soft scratch of the brush as it gave form to a thought? Creating a book was a monumental undertaking. Before the invention of woodblock printing, every copy of a text had to be written out by hand by a scribe. This made books incredibly rare and expensive objects, treasures owned only by the imperial library, wealthy families, or important monasteries. The process of printing itself was a physical feat. A text was first written on thin paper and pasted face down onto a smoothly planed wooden block. A carver would then carefully cut away the wood around the characters, leaving them raised in relief. Ink was applied to this block, a sheet of paper was pressed firmly onto it, and then it was peeled away, now bearing the mirrored text. A single book required the carving of countless blocks, a vast investment of time and skilled labor. This painstaking reality explains the chasm of literacy in ancient China. For the elite scholar class, literacy was the very air they breathed, the absolute requirement for power and prestige. But for the farmer, the artisan, and the merchant, there was no time, no money, and no social need to learn the thousands of complex characters. Their world was one of oral tradition, of skills passed down by demonstration and memory, not by written manual. The ability to read and write was a towering wall separating the ruling class from the ruled, a wall built not of stone but of knowledge. The power of the character was absolute, and its possession defined a person's entire universe. The same characters that built a cultural wall of knowledge also defined the physical boundaries of daily life, for travel across this vast empire was a monumental undertaking. The primary mode of transportation for the vast majority was their own 2 feet. A peasant's world was often limited to the distance he could walk to his fields and back in a single day, his entire universe contained within the horizon of his village. For those who needed to carry goods to a local market, a simple wooden cart pulled by a donkey or an ox was the height of convenience, its wooden wheels creaking and groaning along dirt paths that turned to deep mud with every rain. The speed of such a journey was measured not in miles per hour, but in the patience required to endure its relentless slowness. Can you feel the dust on that road, coating your clothes and filling your lungs with every plodding step? For the wealthy and the official class, horseback riding offered a faster, though still arduous, alternative. But the true superhighway of ancient China was not made of dirt or stone, it was made of water. The Grand Canal was one of the most ambitious engineering projects in human history, a massive artificial river stretching over 1,000 miles. It connected the fertile rice-producing lands of the south with the political and military centers of the north in a direct liquid artery. This was not a canal for small boats. Massive grain barges, some over 100 feet long, were towed along its length by teams of laborers walking along the towpaths on the banks. These floating mountains of tax grain, paid by southern farmers to the central government, were the literal fuel that powered the imperial capital. The canal was also a bustling passenger route, with crowded ferries and private vessels carrying officials, merchants, and pilgrims. Its locks and channels were feats of hydraulic genius, maintaining water levels across flat plains and gentle hills, a silent testament to the organizational power of the state. To manage an empire of this scale, the government operated a lightning-fast courier system. A network of postal stations was spaced a day's travel apart along the main imperial roads. Official couriers riding swift horses could carry urgent messages from one station to the next, where a fresh horse and rider would be waiting to continue the relay. This system allowed an edict from the emperor to cross vast distances in a matter of days instead of months. The roads they traveled were themselves an achievement. The most famous were the paved imperial highways, wide enough for 5 chariots to travel abreast, lined with trees for shade and marked with milestones. But these well-maintained routes were primarily for military movement and government business. For everyone else, travel was a matter of permission, not right. To move between provinces, a traveler needed a guosuo, a travel document issued by the local authorities. This pass stated your name, origin, destination, and the reason for your journey. Guards at checkpoints along the roads and canal locks would inspect these documents rigorously. A merchant without a proper guosuo could have his goods confiscated. A peasant away from his registered village could be arrested as a vagrant. This system of control tied the population to the land, ensuring tax collection and social stability. The freedom to simply pick up and go was a dream for most, a reality only for the privileged few on official duty. The empire was vast, but for the individual, the world was often as small as the distance one could walk with a pass in hand. The same roads that carried merchants and officials also marched the sons of farmers off to war. A conscription notice could arrive at any time, tearing a man from his family and his fields to serve in the emperor's army. This was not a career chosen for glory, but a heavy duty imposed by the state. For the typical peasant soldier, his equipment was starkly practical. He might be issued lamellar armor, a heavy vest made from hundreds of small iron or leather plates laced tightly together. It was effective but cumbersome, a second skin of metal and sweat. His primary weapon was often the jai, a hybrid halberd that combined a spear point for thrusting with a curved blade for hacking, a versatile tool for the chaos of close combat. Crossbowmen formed the backbone of many armies, their weapons capable of launching bolts with enough force to pierce armor at a considerable distance. Training these men, most of whom wanted only to return to their farms, was a matter of relentless discipline and formation drilling. They learned to move as a single, cohesive unit, to raise their shields in an unbreakable wall, and to advance and retreat to the beat of a drum. Their lives were cheap, and their existence was defined by mud, fatigue, and the constant shadow of death. Can you hear the distant beat of that drum? A sound that meant order on the parade ground but terror on the battlefield. The most visible symbol of this defensive mindset stretches across mountains and deserts like a stone dragon. The Great Wall was not a single project but a series of fortifications linked together over centuries. Its construction was one of the most ambitious and brutal public works in history. Conscripted laborers, soldiers, and convicts were sent to the remote frontiers to move millions of tons of earth and stone. They worked in harsh conditions with inadequate food and shelter, and countless lives were lost to exhaustion, accident, and exposure. The wall was more than a physical barrier, it was a statement of imperial power and a controlled border. Watchtowers placed at regular intervals allowed signals to be passed along its length using smoke by day and fire by night, creating an early warning system that could alert the capital to an invasion in a matter of hours. It regulated trade and migration, forcing all movement through fortified gates where taxes could be collected and travelers could be monitored. For the soldiers stationed there, life was one of extreme monotony and isolation. A constant vigil in the wind-scoured silence of the high peaks, their eyes forever scanning the northern horizon for dust clouds that could mean an approaching threat. When war did come, its impact shattered the fragile rhythms of daily life. A call for conscription could strip a village of its strongest young men, leaving the elderly, women, and children to struggle with the planting or the harvest. This often led to famine, as fields lay fallow or were not fully tended. Armies on the march lived off the land, which meant they requisitioned grain from the very farms they passed or simply took it, leaving entire communities destitute. The social fabric, so carefully woven through Confucian ideals of family and hierarchy, would fray under the strain. Tales of heroism and tragedy from the front lines would filter back, becoming the stuff of legend and opera, but for those living through it, war was a time of pure survival. The emperor's mandate from heaven was tested most severely not by philosophical debate, but by the sword. A dynasty that could not protect its people from invasion or crush internal rebellion was seen as losing the favor of the gods, a perception that could fuel the very uprisings it sought to suppress. In the end, the soldier's lot was a grim reminder that the beautiful order of the empire, with its silks and its scholars' poetry, was ultimately defended by the calloused hand of a farmer holding a spear far from the field he called home. A newborn's first cry was a promise to the ancestors. In a society built on family continuity, a child's arrival was both a profound hope and a serious responsibility. The first major milestone arrived just 1 month after birth, with the 1-month-old celebration, or Manu. This was the moment a newborn was formally introduced to the community, a joyous occasion where friends and relatives brought gifts and offered blessings for a long and prosperous life. The infant's head was shaved, a symbolic cleansing of the birth process, and the family would distribute red-dyed eggs, their round shape and vibrant color representing happiness and the continuous cycle of life. For a family that had welcomed a son, the celebration was especially vibrant, for he carried the weight of continuing the family line and performing the essential rites of ancestor veneration. Can you sense the mixture of relief and expectation in that crowded room? The collective breath held for a tiny new life. The education of that child began almost as soon as he could walk, and its foundation was unwavering discipline. For boys, especially those from families with any means at all, the ultimate purpose of learning was to master the Confucian classics. This was not an education for personal enrichment, but a rigorous moral and intellectual training designed to produce a virtuous man who understood his place in the world. He learned the 5 cardinal relationships, the bedrock of social order, governing the duties between ruler and subject, father and son, husband and wife, elder and younger brother, and friend. His entire worldview was shaped by texts like the Analects, which taught that a gentleman cultivates virtue through respect, loyalty, and a deep sense of responsibility. Failure to learn these lessons was met with swift correction. A tutor or father wielded a bamboo cane not just to punish a forgotten character, but to discipline a wandering mind or a disrespectful tone. This was a world where a child's misbehavior was seen as a direct reflection of poor parenting, a potential stain on the entire family's honor. Amidst this stern training, there were moments of simple, universal joy. Children played with toys carved from wood or molded from clay. A simple spinning top set whirling with a string could captivate a child for hours. They flew kites made from bamboo frames and silk or paper, their colorful shapes dancing against the vast sky, a momentary freedom from the strict rules below. Little girls might have dolls made of cloth, practicing the nurturing roles they would be expected to fulfill as wives and mothers. These simple amusements were a rare, precious space where a child could simply be a child, their laughter a brief respite from the heavy expectations that would soon define their lives. Those expectations diverged sharply based on gender. A boy's path was pointed outward toward the world. His ultimate goal, however distant, was to bring honor to his family through scholarly achievement or, at the very least, through skilled and honest labor. He was taught that his body belonged to his parents and that any injury or disgrace to it was an act of profound unfilialness. A girl's world, by contrast, was deliberately folded inward. From a young age, she was taught the 3 obediences and 4 virtues. She was to obey her father before marriage, her husband after marriage, and her sons in her widowhood. Her education was primarily domestic, focused on mastering skills like weaving, cooking, and managing a household. While a privileged few girls from scholarly families might learn to read and write, their studies were usually confined to texts that reinforced their subordinate role, preparing them for a life of quiet service within the inner quarters. The weight a child carried was the collective ambition and anxiety of their entire lineage. Every lesson learned, every character memorized, and every stitch sewn was a step toward fulfilling a debt that could never be fully repaid, the debt of life itself owed to one's parents and ancestors. A son's success in the examinations could elevate a family for generations, while a daughter's virtuous marriage could create a powerful alliance. Their childhood was not a time of innocent exploration, but a careful and deliberate preparation for a life of duty. How much of their own dreams and desires were quietly set aside in the silent service of a name that would long outlive them? The quiet discipline of the scholar's study gave rise to explosions that would reshape the entire world. While philosophers contemplated the heavens, practical needs on the ground sparked a cascade of inventions so profound we still live with their consequences today. The most transformative of these began with something we now take for granted: paper. Before its invention, records were kept on heavy bamboo slips tied together with cords or on expensive silk. Then, around the 2nd century, a court official named Kai Lun perfected a process using tree bark, hemp, rags, and old fishnets, pulping them in water and pressing the fibers into thin, durable sheets. This was not just an innovation, it was a revolution in communication. Knowledge could now be recorded, stored, and transported with an ease never before imagined, making the written word accessible beyond the elite and laying the foundation for everything that followed. That foundation led directly to another leap: printing. The sheer effort of copying texts by hand had kept books as rare treasures, but with paper now abundant, the ingenuity of woodblock printing emerged. A mirror image of an entire page was carved in relief onto a wooden block, inked, and pressed onto paper. This allowed for the mass reproduction of everything from Buddhist sutras to classical texts, spreading literacy and ideas across the empire. Centuries later, movable type made from baked clay would be invented, a system of reusable characters that could be rearranged for different pages. Yet the sheer number of Chinese characters made woodblock printing often more practical for most jobs, a testament to how a technology is shaped by the language it serves. Can you envision the quiet industry of the print shop, the scent of ink and wood, as each page was pulled from a block, carrying the same words to 1,000 different eyes? This flow of information was matched by a new power to navigate the world itself. The first compass was not a needle on a dial, but a spoon. Han Dynasty diviners used a lodestone, a naturally magnetic mineral, carved into the shape of a spoon and placed on a polished bronze plate. The handle of this spoon would unfailingly point to the south, a mystical phenomenon used to harmonize buildings and tombs with the cosmic order. But soon, this magical tool was refined for sailors and travelers. Magnetized iron needles were floated in bowls of water or suspended from silk threads, creating a reliable guide for navigating vast deserts and treacherous seas. This invention did not just help merchants find their way, it unlocked the globe, enabling the great voyages of exploration that would connect continents. Then there was the invention that began as a recipe for immortality. Taoist alchemists, experimenting with mixtures of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal in their quest for an elixir of life, stumbled upon a terrifying and volatile compound, gunpowder. At first, its explosive properties were used for spectacular fireworks to frighten evil spirits and celebrate festivals, but the military potential was quickly realized. What began as colorful bursts in the sky evolved into fire lances, early flamethrowers, and then metal bombs and rockets that changed the nature of warfare forever. This progression from spiritual seeking to world-altering power captures a central truth. The most profound innovations often emerge from the most human of desires for communication, for direction, and even for eternal life. Guiding all of this was a celestial obsession. The emperor's mandate was tied directly to the heavens, and so court astronomers maintained a continuous, precise record of the sky. They built elaborate armillary spheres, bronze models of the cosmos with rings representing the paths of the stars and planets. They meticulously charted the movements of the sun and moon to perfect the agricultural calendar, and their records of solar eclipses and comets were so accurate they are still used by astronomers today. A comet was not just a celestial object, it was a portent, a message from heaven that the emperor's virtue might be waning. This was where astronomy met astrology, a practice taken with the utmost seriousness. Before any major state decision, from launching a military campaign to appointing a minister, court astrologers would cast horoscopes and read the alignments of the stars. The personal lives of the elite were also guided by these beliefs, with auspicious dates chosen for weddings, journeys, and even the construction of a new home. The rhythm of the cosmos was the rhythm of life itself, from the farmer planting his rice to the emperor on his dragon throne, all moving to the silent, predictable, and yet mysterious music of the stars. The echo of a farmer's song across a flooded rice paddy and the soft scratch of a scholar's brush on paper are the true heartbeats of this civilization. We have walked through a world where cosmic order was etched into the grid of a city and woven into the coarse hemp of a peasant's tunic. This was not a society of isolated moments, but a vast, interconnected web where the harvest in the field directly sustained the philosopher in his studio, and the merchant's journey down the Grand Canal fueled the emperor's rituals in the Forbidden City. The resilience of ancient China did not come from its monuments alone, but from the unbreakable will of its people, who found meaning in duty, harmony in nature, and beauty in the rhythm of daily toil. Their legacy is not locked in the past. It lives on in the words we read, the teas we drink, the philosophies that guide us, and the very idea that a society's greatest strength lies in the quiet, cumulative power of its everyday lives. We would love to hear which part of this whispered history resonated most deeply with you. Was it the scholar's grueling path to power, the hidden influence of women, or the artisan's silent skill? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to join us as we continue to uncover the forgotten stories that shaped our world.